So our James passage this morning talks very clearly about the danger posed by uncontrolled or uncontrollable tongue or mouth. Maybe James is trying to say to us as well this morning, put it that way. Maybe he's trying to tell us something even to us this morning. Don't take your tongue for granted. How about that? Woo-hoo. Yeah, don't take it for granted, or do not maybe underestimate what tongue can do. Good, bad, and ugly at the same time. It has tremendous capability of undoing your whole life, and or bringing blemish on somebody else in the way we speak, in the way we choose words to convey our anger. Sometimes it is just unbelievable what we say to one another in anger and frustration, right? Yeah. What we spew to one another. And sometimes we go home and we are so shameful. Did I really even say that? And have courage to say, I'm sorry about what I said. And other times, it just felt good, I said it. And then people move on, right? No regrets. But of course, you left somebody wounded, right? So, so tongue can be so unruly. So why is James so mindful about tongue? Why is he so mindful about this mouth? Well, we have to go back to 2 Sundays because James is writing to former members of the Jerusalem church where James was the pastor, and for whatever reason, people moved around too in the ancient days. Most probably because of jobs. Even in the ancient days, people moved and settled wherever there was job. Some, of course, were taken forcefully, like we read in Exodus, right? That God had to send Moses to redeem the children of Israel from the slavery, right? But others moved for various other reasons. And so James is writing this particular letter that we read to the Jewish Christian diaspora, people who went scattered, right? And he is basically saying to them to be mindful. He is saying, as confessing Christians, strive to maintain good, unjudgmental moral theology. That's my word. Or maybe we could say, maybe he was saying, the theology we espouse is relational theology. You cannot have a good relationship with God and ugly relationship with your neighbors. It's just not possible. Right? Agree? Yeah. You cannot just say, I am so close to God, and then just profusely hate somebody. That's just a big contradiction, theologically and biblically. So he's basically saying to them, yes, we are imperfect. There is only one who is perfect, that is Jesus, that is God. But if we endure, this endurance will help you to mature. If you struggle, right? Early on he says, if you struggle and don't give up, it will add some maturity to you. Wisdom does not fall from the sky. Wisdom is found on the dirt as you wrestle and struggle with. Yeah. Eventually, out of our mistakes, we will learn there's a pit and you might fall. And so, don't go. Right? Of course, we can't tell that to our children. And he also said, James also said, God does not tempt us, right? Remember in chapter 1? God does not tempt us. Don't ever say, God is tempting me to do this. No. God refines us. God has a way of refining our lives and get better at doing it. So these are some things that we looked at. In chapter 1, verses 19 and 20, he had already spoken about relationship. Let me read to you. Verse 19. Understand this, dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce righteousness God desires. He already said that. But in chapter 3, he's elaborating a little more, adding some nuts and bolts to hold it together. Does it make sense? So what he is saying is, humility goes a long way. It's tough to buy one, but when you have it, it takes you far, holds you together. So, last Sunday, if you remember, I spoke about James was against favoritism and preferential treatments, right? And he was saying, if you play with those, they are like house of cards. It will stand for a while. It might look nice. But there is no foundation, so it's going to crumble and will fall. And we have stories after stories, if you read newspapers and magazines, how people have fallen flat on their nose, right? Yeah. So that is the beginning of James's idea about ethical behaviors of Christian. If we follow Christ, then we should really have some good idea what not to do. It's interesting, though. He starts with teachers. I know there are a lot of teachers here. And he's saying teachers have a call in their life. When they know you're called to be a teacher, you know you can inspire people and teach them to become somebody. You can inspire a dream. But James is saying, but not all of us are teachers. And so, even though we aspire to be teachers, not all of us are called to be teachers because we have some certain standard. So he is saying, I wonder why he was saying that. It's because sometimes we Christians, we are like teachers. We want to tell people what to do, right? We want to tell them how to behave. And sometimes we speak as if God had privately spoken to you to go and tell that person, behave. Without us evaluating where we stand. It is good to preach and teach. But does our example follow, what we are saying? That is what I think James is getting at. I read this article from A.K.M. Adams. I don't know what A.K.M. stands for, but his last name is Adam. He's a New Testament tutor at Oxford University. And so here is a quote from him. The danger of teachers' speech lies in the perilous combination of teachers' authority on one hand and misused, damaging speech or erroneous claims on the other. Few should become teachers. And those who do become teachers should watch what they say, because teachers will be held liable not solely for their follies, but also for the errors that their students assimilate and pass on. End of quote. In other words, Mr. Adam is saying, don't be a false teacher and don't mislead others. Maybe that is what James is saying too. In Matthew, I found two verses that were scary to me. You want to know what they are? Let me share that to you. Matthew chapter 12, verses 36 and 37. I'm reading it. I tell you, on the day of judgment, you will have to give account on every careless word you utter. I go, I have not read those verses in a long time. Give me a shiver. The next verse, 37. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Wow. So I guess even Matthew is saying, have a better choice of words. Don't just spew words willy-nilly, kind of. Be thoughtful is probably Matthew is trying to say. Now, James is not very subtle about these verses in chapter 3. In fact, I see them progression of thought, like a building block. So whatever he said in chapter 1 and 2, now he's finally beginning to say, okay, now this tongue that we have, right? So see, he is not trying to be cunning, trying to be smart, but he's just, progressing with his thoughts, and he is not blindsiding anybody, but he uses 3 different metaphors about tongue. Metaphors that can explain 3 different things about tongue. So I read my Baptist friend, Sandra Heck Pulaski. She's a professor of New Testament at Baptist Theological Seminary, Richmond, Virginia. I need my Baptist friend to explain this. So here's a quote she says. The first metaphor, that of guiding a horse with a bridle, is the most simple and straightforward. The rider or chariot driver directs the strength, speed, and direction of a horse much larger than himself by means of a bit in the horse's mouth. An implement which incidentally functions by pressing against the animal's tongue. Quite literally, then the one who is able to control the horse's tongue with it in the mouth controls the whole body. It's a tongue. This concept was already widespread in ancient world. They understood spirited horses are broken by the use of small bit. Fascinating. Before that, in the Old Testament, our prophets had already spoken about how to control our tongue. So there is 2 slides, 2 Proverbs texts. One is Proverbs 18, verse 21 right there. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who live it will eat its fruit. It's in the Bible. Let's get another one. Whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. That's true, right? He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin. Wow. I tell you, I didn't read some of these things. Maybe I read it, but it just didn't register. But as I was working on the sermon, I go, wow, there's a lot of stuff in the scriptures about tongue. Ooh. So, then he goes to the second metaphor. Ship's rudder introduces additional aspects of the metaphor. The captain, rudder, and ship are analogous to the rider or driver, bit, and horse in the previous image. This is still my Baptist preacher talking. This time, however, she says, we also consider the influence of outside forces, wind and waves that would take the ship on a direction course or destroy it altogether. The captain who is able to keep control of the rudder, like the person able to keep control of one's tongue, can weather difficult circumstances and emerge intact and on the course. Different sides of the metaphor, isn't it? And then the third metaphor. Third metaphor develops in a distinctly different direction than the first two, she says. After all, the bit and the rudder are simply tools. In James's view, however, there's a sense in which tongue is not simply a tool to be utilized, but an agent independent of its possessor. Ooh. The metaphor of the igniting flame, like those of the bit and the rudder, deals with small entities with larger effects. Unlike the bit and the rudder, though the flame is uncontrolled and uncontrollable, and what it sets in motion is not purposeful but destructive. This aspect of danger of uncontrolled speech is of particular importance to James. So he goes on at some length to describe its destructive nature, upsetting the entire created order. Yeah. So she's basically referring to verses 5 and 6. A great forest can be set on fire by one tiny spark, and the tongue is a flame of fire. It is full of wickedness and poisons every part of the body. And the tongue is set on fire by hell itself and can turn our whole lives into a blazing flame of destruction and disaster. That's what the Living Translation says. And it makes sense, because in the Western states, we have seen a lot of fires the last couple of years, isn't it? Yeah. And thousands of firefighters fought days in and days out. You know. Millions of acreages lost. Structures lost. Lives, but human and animals lost because of fire. James wants us to know the enormity of destruction our tongue can cause. Wow, that is very humbling to me. So, time has come upon us to examine how we utilize our tongue. Is it for us or for God's glory? Because words can heal, but words can hurt as well, right? Yeah. So there's a psalm in 139 verses 23 and 24 where psalmist says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart today. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you, and lead me along the path of everlasting life." That is not a bad prayer. If we can leave each day with those two verses in our hearts, in our mind, I think we will be a better pilgrims in this world, well-pleasing unto God. Amen? That is some thoughts from James chapter 3, and more is coming.